Jacob and Michael Adams were no ordinary twins. Born in the heart of Chicago, their arrival defied all expectations and left the city in awe. Jacob, with his pale, fair complexion, golden hair, and piercing blue eyes, looked like he stepped out of a storybook. In contrast, Michael had deep, rich brown eyes and a darker skin tone that made him a striking figure. The differences in their appearances were so remarkable that their parents, John and Emily Adams, could only stare in astonishment when they first held their newborns. They, too, were taken aback by the unusual yet beautiful pair they had created. The twins quickly became the talk of the town. People were fascinated by the stark contrast in their looks and speculated about the science behind it. Some whispered about genetic anomalies, others about miracles, but in the end, no one had an answer. What mattered most, however, was that Jacob and Michael shared a bond that went beyond their physical appearances. They weren't just siblings, they were inseparable best friends, connected by something deeper than anyone could comprehend. From their earliest days, they did everything together: toys, games, secrets, dreams. They were shared in equal measure between the two of them. The world around them might have been filled with questions, but those questions never shook their bond. Their parents, determined to give them a sense of normalcy, navigated the curiosity of the outside world with grace. John, a schoolteacher, used their story to educate his students about the importance of diversity and how the world is filled with differences that should be celebrated. Emily, a nurse, taught them the importance of compassion, understanding, and resilience in the face of adversity. As they grew, their unique personalities began to shine. Jacob developed a love for solving mysteries. He was the kind of person who could never resist a challenge, often watching cop shows and imagining himself as the hero who would protect others. Michael, on the other hand, was drawn to science, fascinated by the workings of the human body. He spent countless hours buried in books, learning everything he could about how the body worked, always hoping to help people. By the time they entered adulthood, their paths had diverged. Jacob became a dedicated police officer, someone who would go to any lengths to protect his city and its people. Michael, following his passion for medicine, became a cardiologist, saving lives in his own way. But despite their different careers, their bond remained as strong as ever. Every time they spoke, they joked about how they were two sides of the same coin, two halves that made a whole. They completed each other in a way no one else could. It was an ordinary Saturday, just like any other. Jacob had been called in for a last-minute shift, something that threw off their usual routine. Michael, however, didn't mind. He decided to make the most of it and head to McDonald's for a quick meal instead of their usual diner breakfast. He pulled into the parking lot of the familiar fast food joint, a place he had frequented for years. The air was crisp, the sun shining brightly, and the world around him seemed to move at a peaceful, quiet pace. Michael ordered his usual meal, nothing fancy, just a simple meal to fuel his day, and settled into his favorite corner seat by the window. There, he could watch the world unfold before him. A family caught his eye. A little girl was tugging at her father's hand, begging for ice cream. Michael couldn't help but smile at the innocence of it. Then there was a group of teenagers at a nearby table, passionately arguing over who was the best basketball player in the school. Their animated discussion made Michael chuckle, and for a moment, it felt like the world was perfectly in place. As he finished his meal, Michael checked the time. It was getting late, and he still had a few things to do before heading home. He waved goodbye to the friendly cashier, a young man who always greeted him with a smile, and made his way out the door. The afternoon sun greeted him with warmth, and for a brief moment, everything felt right. It was a typical day, until it wasn't. As he walked toward his car, an excruciating pain suddenly gripped his chest. It was sharp and unrelenting, unlike anything he had ever felt before. His legs buckled, and his vision began to fade. He gasped for breath, but it was no use. The pain was overwhelming. Michael collapsed onto the cold pavement, his body trembling uncontrollably. The world around him seemed to dissolve, becoming muffled and distant. He could hear faint sounds, the chatter of people, the hum of traffic, but it all felt far away. A few bystanders paused, unsure of what to do. One person even pulled out their phone, but instead of helping, they retreated into their car, making no call to emergency services. Michael's vision blurred further, and it felt like time was slipping through his fingers. No one was coming to his aid. Just as the situation seemed to be slipping into hopelessness, the sound of a patrol car pulling into the parking lot broke through the fog in Michael's mind. Jacob, who had been finishing his shift, noticed the growing crowd and the unusual stillness in the air. He parked quickly and rushed over, his instincts already on high alert. As he approached, his heart skipped a beat. There, lying lifeless on the pavement, was a figure he knew all too well, his twin brother, Michael. Michael! Jacob's voice was loud, filled with panic, but his mind quickly went into autopilot. The sight of Michael, his pale face, shallow breathing, and still body, sent a wave of dread through him, but he couldn't afford to let fear take over. He knelt beside Michael, his hands trembling as he checked his pulse. It was faint, weak. Jacob's heart pounded in his chest, and his mind raced through everything he had learned in his years as a police officer and paramedic. "Someone call an ambulance," he yelled, but the crowd stood frozen, none of them moving to help. Frustrated, Jacob grabbed his radio and issued a call for emergency backup. He didn't have time to wait. His training kicked in, and he immediately started CPR, his hands pressing down firmly on his brother's chest. He could feel his brother's life slipping away with every compression, but Jacob didn't stop. He couldn't. "Stay with me, Mike," he murmured, his voice cracking. Sweat poured down his face, but he didn't care. Every second felt like a lifetime, and with each moment, his desperation grew. Jacob's determination seemed endless, but the pressure was immense. It felt like hours had passed as he worked to keep Michael alive. But then, just as the weight of the situation was starting to crush him, the familiar wail of an ambulance filled the air. Relief surged through him as paramedics rushed onto the scene. Jacob climbed into the back of the ambulance, never letting go of Michael's hand. His brother was still unconscious, his body fighting for life, but Jacob wasn't going to leave his side. The paramedics worked tirelessly, administering life-saving medication and monitoring Michael's vitals. Jacob watched every movement, his gaze fixed on his brother's face, praying for a miracle. Memories of their childhood flashed before his eyes, playing in the backyard, sharing secrets late at night, celebrating milestones together. He couldn't bear the thought of losing Michael. Not now, not ever. When the hospital finally came into view, Jacob felt a glimmer of hope. He clung to it, hoping that they weren't too late. Inside the hospital, doctors worked urgently to stabilize Michael, and hours passed like minutes. Jacob paced the waiting room, his uniform covered in dust from the parking lot, but his mind was consumed with thoughts of his brother. Finally, a doctor emerged from the operating room. "Officer Adams?" she called, and Jacob's heart leapt into his throat. "Your brother is stable now. It was a heart attack, but you got him help just in time. Another few minutes, and things could have been much worse." Tears welled up in Jacob's eyes as he whispered a prayer of gratitude. He was allowed to see Michael, who was resting in a recovery bed, his face pale but alive. The steady beeping of the heart monitor was the most beautiful sound Jacob had ever heard. When Michael's eyes fluttered open and locked with Jacob's, a faint smile spread across his face. "You saved me," he whispered, his voice weak but filled with gratitude. Jacob chuckled softly, wiping a tear from his cheek. That's what brothers are for. In the days that followed, their story spread throughout the city, inspiring countless people with the power of love, family, and the unbreakable bond they shared. Jacob and Michael had been given a second chance at life, and neither would take it for granted. Together, they proved that even in the darkest of times, love and determination could light the way. Thank you for watching till the end. I hope you enjoyed the story. If you did, don't hesitate to like the video and share it with your friends. To subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell for more fascinating stories. Have a nice day.